Welcome back everyone, it's Mags, and given the time of year, my day job doesn't really allow for me to exist. So I've been taking what little free time I have to explore some of NIS's shorter, more obscure titles, and one that really caught my eye was Penny Punching Princess, originally released for the PlayStation Vita in 2016 and ported to the Switch in 2018. I totally didn't just want an excuse to use my new PS TV, but that's besides the point. Penny Punching Princess was both developed and published by Nippon Ichi Software, and you can tell.
And those tears of hers smelled like ammonia.
The story is nothing too deep and clearly isn't taking itself seriously. It's a humorous romp about a princess whose father, the old king, invested all of his money into bad stocks and got into so much debt that he fucking died. The princess is convinced that he was tricked into doing so by the Dragolone family, a group of ruthless loan sharks who pretty much have every citizen in the kingdom in debt. So to avenge her late father and on behalf of all the citizens, she takes up arms with her butler Sebastian, yes the stag beetle, and sets off to take them down. There's some light commentary about capitalism and the deeper conflict between the princess having to fight with capitalism despite it destroying her father and her life. But that's all put onto the back burner. This game isn't focused on being deep, this game is focused on being silly. All the cutscenes are pretty short, clearly letting the gameplay be the main focus, but it manages to have funny and enjoyable interactions, and I love the pixel art here, both in stages and in the character cutscene portraits. Everyone talks in this goofy accent that I had no idea how to read at first, but you just kinda adjust to it, which oddly makes the world feel more unique and real. And instead of voice acting, there are these cute little blippy sounds, for lack of any other word that makes sense, assigned to each character like you'd hear in Animal Crossing. Except the narrator, for some reason, who all of a sudden will speak in normal-ass full sentences.
And those tears of hers smelled like sauerkraut.
This game is a beat 'em up. You run around, spam square to hit stuff, maybe circle if you're feeling a little wild, and have a little dodge roll, all in good fun. But there's a twist. If you couldn't already tell by the story, capitalism is a big theme of the game, and you'd think it would be anti-capitalism given the premise, and you'd be right, but even so, there's no escaping it. This world is ruled by money, and despite her absolute hatred for it, the princess must do the same. You see, the princess's main weapon isn't a gun or a sword, it's not even the behemoths of boxing gloves she has on. The princess achieves total annihilation with her calculator. That's right, we're going full accountant mode. In this game, you shake down every enemy for all they're worth, and then use that money to bribe other enemies as an alternate way to get rid of them, and have them work for you. That is the main gimmick of Penny Punching Princess, using your calculator to bribe the hell out of literally everything in the game. Then after you bribe something, you can summon it to attack for you a certain number of times. And it doesn't stop at enemies. Maps are littered with stage hazards like spikes or wrecking balls, and you can bribe them too, turning the environment itself to your side. Hell, you even need to bribe gates open to access optional areas and bribe healing circles to heal yourself. You can even bribe some bosses after defeating them the normal way for the first time, which will end the fight immediately. The goal of each individual battle is to bribe whatever you can to make it easier for yourself, whether it's an annoying ass stage hazard or a strong enemy, adding a certain layer of strategy to the game. Regardless of how much money you have overall, you can only use the money you've earned in the stage, which allows the game to craft stages in almost a puzzle-like way. Like this asshole stage throwing a large enemy at you right at the beginning, where you're not nearly gonna have enough money to bribe it away, but it also leaves countless explosive hazards in the arena, so they're clearly intending you to bribe and use those to defeat it. It makes you think about how you use your money, how much you actually want to spend versus save for later, which enemies and obstacles to bribe, and always making sure to squeeze as much money out of enemies as possible. At any point, you can also input as much money as you want manually into the calculator and spend it on a coin miracle, which gives you a completely random assortment of effects to choose from, the strength of which depends on how much money you put in. Listen, capitalism doesn't exist without a little gambling. Each of the icons that show up can do multiple things, like for the gold icon, sometimes it applies a buff that gets you more money from enemies, or it can just straight up give you money. Other effects include a damage increasing buff, freezing enemies, or logo.png. It is honestly such a unique, interesting, and funny system. It's the kind of thing that just screams NIS. Stages are structured similar to something like Bayonetta or Devil May Cry, where specific battles are contained to specific areas and you get graded on each one. The grades do literally nothing, they're based mainly on your highest combo in the fight and how long it took you, and you even get an overall grade for the stage based on your grades in each fight. you've heard the whole system. It doesn't really mean anything, and there aren't even any trophies for getting high ranks, so it's just for funsies. Obviously, for funsies is normally the entire appeal of a ranking system like this, but I only found it a bit weird because your moveset is not really anything too complex in this game. It's much more focused on the bribing mechanic and the RPG elements like upgrading your stats through crafting armor and using skill points. Skill points are obtained from statues of Zenigami, the god of money, that you can collect from special chests and stages or craft in the castle alongside armor. Each statue you can craft will give you a certain amount of skill points. Armor gives you a boost in attack and defense, gives you a special skill you can use that's tied to that specific piece, and determines how much money you can hold at once in a map. Yeah, there's a limit to how much money you can stock up and bring home with you, which is a little bit annoying, but I kind of get it from a strategic perspective. Crafting armor and statues uses the very same hazards and enemies you bribe. Anything you bribe gets taken back to your home base, the castle, and each armor or statue requires a certain amount of specific bribed things to craft, plus a healthy lump of cash. It took me way too long to realize that crafting doesn't actually use up your bribed things. You don't spend 3 red dragons, for example, to craft this statue, it's simply a prerequisite to buying it, meaning you'll never have to go out to bribe more of them unless you encounter another item that requires more than that. Except there are so many enemy types anyway that you'll still be replaying the hell out of these stages, because damn near every single stage introduces a plethora of brand new enemies, which will then open up a plethora of brand new statues to craft. You can only ever see the armor and statues available that use things you've already bribed before, so the only way to see new ones is to bribe new enemies. So generally, you'll play a new stage, see a bunch of new enemies, bribe them, and then go back and see all the new statues you can now craft, which will then have you replaying a bunch of stages to meet all of those requirements, between every single level. In that regard, the game can be extremely grindy. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's really cool seeing all the new enemies, especially knowing they'll get me more skill points or new armor to look at, and to just see which new attacks they can all perform. It feels like you're collecting them like Pokemon. And while I would love to say that this is a grind that I don't really mind due to the charming atmosphere of the game and the short length of maps, the truth is not that simple. In fact, I'm just gonna lay it out for you. Penny Punching Princess has to be one of the most uniquely frustrating games I have ever laid my hands on. It's honestly impressive just how much it made me ask the question, who the hell playtested this? Because despite the amazing ideas behind it, the execution of said ideas is nothing short of baffling. For starters, this game has a couple different control schemes, with the primary one utilizing the touchscreen. It was a Vita game after all, and it's no wonder the only other console it got put on was the Switch. Each enemy will have some markers visible on their health bar, and when their health reaches that threshold, they'll be stunned and you can milk their wallets. This is the way you get money from enemies. Normally, while they're stunned, you extract money by rubbing them on the touchscreen. And already the cracks begin to show. Because how are you going to displace your entire ass hand to use the touchscreen in the middle of a fast-paced battle? Luckily, the game also lets you use all button controls, which is of course what I had to use given I was playing on a PS TV. And for that, you just spin the right stick instead. Rest in peace all your right Joy-Cons if you're playing on Switch. This still displaces your hand somewhat, but it's fine enough, and apparently, according to other reviews, gets you more money than rubbing the touchscreen does. That's 1 point for button controls. Unfortunately, that's not actually where the frustration comes from. Most of that comes from the bribing system. As you can see, to bribe enemies, you hold the left bumper to bring up your entire calculator on the screen and select which enemy to bribe. There are so many layers of problems with what you're looking at right now that I don't even know where to begin. Never mind that this covers a quarter of your screen already, including the required amounts needed for bribing in the first place listed on enemies. When you're first introduced to this mechanic, it tells you to manually type in the amount of money you want to use. That's not happening. But what you're actually supposed to do is press the right bumper and an enemy will automatically be selected with the appropriate amount input. From there, if you're using touch controls, you tap which thing you want to bribe, or with button controls, you use the D-pad to select one. This makes bribing a sitch when there are just a handful of enemies on screen. But what about when the entire arena is flooded with them? The game does not stop when you pull your calculator out, and it is next to impossible to pinpoint an exact enemy or hazard to bribe when the arena looks like the Wanted minigame from Super Mario 64 DS. Seriously, imagine 14 enemies attacking you and you're just spamming the D-pad like a dumbass trying to make the cursor land on the giant one in the middle! What the hell else, man? And using the D-pad totally displaces your hand from the left stick, so you have to stop in your tracks just to try to select an enemy in the middle of a battle that's already kicking your ass. Maybe the touchscreen would make this a little more bearable, being able to just tap an enemy instead, but that would only be putting a band-aid on a broken spine. Even without the whole bribing process, these fights a lot of the time just seem downright unfair, and trust me, I really don't say that lightly. I mentioned that you have to be strategic about which hazards and enemies you bribe, but there is a cooldown, so you can only bribe one thing at a time before having to wait a while. And these environments are absolutely jam-packed with strong as hell enemies that'll knock a third of your health bar off, and absolutely ludicrous amounts of stage hazards to work around. No matter what you bribe, there will still be 3 wrecking balls coming at you from every direction, 4 sets of spikes on the ground, numerous hammers stunning you. It is absolutely absurd. This is not a game where you have a flexible moveset, far from it. So to be absolutely bombarded from every direction by everything at once, while trying to work an entire calculator, makes cruising for a bruising from a hat in time look like mere paper pushing. And there are just so many little things about the gameplay that really add up. Like, the only way you ever get any iframes is by recovering from being stunned. If you're not stunned, you're open to getting wombo comboed in a fraction of a second from full health to none at a moment's notice. I wish I was kidding. Every single enemy has collision, so half the time during crowded arenas, you can hardly even move, which spells instant doom. And yes, attacks can straight up stun you, which just leaves you open to taking more attacks completely uncontrollably. Attacks while stunned only deal half damage, but any damage is too much. You can't animation cancel into a roll. Instead, you're committed to your attacks and combos, which is an unbelievably baffling decision in a game that takes place in the Atlanta airport on Christmas Day. It feels like they just went out of their way to make this game as infuriating as possible. Every single map feels like an uphill battle in the worst way possible. And then you feel your heart sink seeing how much you now have to replay all over again for crafting right afterwards. That was how much of the early game went for me. I will say though, if you stay on top of your skill points, your stat gains get more plentiful, and I found the difficulty to drop off significantly around halfway through the game, after which I actually had a lot more fun. I hate to hold the difficulty of a game against it, because a lot of the time I find enjoyment in taking the time to learn and get better, which in turn allows me to understand the game's systems better and at least appreciate what it's going for. And of course, I never want to discount the possibility that there's just some trick or mechanic I was missing the entire time that could have made my life a lot easier, but this was a pretty heavy case of a game being difficult in all the wrong ways. I never felt like, damn, I gotta do better, despite all my best efforts, but rather that the game as a whole is just horrifically unbalanced, with overcrowded areas, extremely strong enemies, and a very limited moveset to counter them with. To top it all off though, if you've watched the channel before, you'll know I'm a completionist, especially when it comes to achievements and trophies, which is why I don't touch my Switch with a 10-foot pole unless I have to. And the reason I bring that up is because it seems I've been on somewhat of a streak recently of playing games that just have that one achievement that requires an absurd amount of grinding for literally no reason. ZHP has you grinding for 10 plus hours to reach max total level, which gets you jack shit, and The Witch and the 100 Knight had those damn basement floors, but they don't hold a candle to Penny Punching Princess. You see, the rate at which you earn money is generally in the order of magnitude of the 10,000s. The best armor in the game has a carrying capacity of 100,000, which you'll almost never hit besides maybe the final bonus dungeon. The absolute most amount of money you will ever need for practical purposes is to buy all the armor in the game, and even then the word practical is generous given that's also just for a trophy. To buy up all my remaining armor pieces at once required about 1.3 million for me, which in and of itself took hours to get. So why, oh why, is there a trophy for accumulating 10 million? Not cumulatively, mind you. You need to be carrying, at once, 10 million gold. Surely there's some sort of trick, some item or armor that gets you loads more money. This requires tens of hours of playing the same stages over and over again. There are hardly any tricks to quickening the process, except this one that I'm a little salty I didn't see until after the entire ordeal. The day these old forums go offline is the day my soul dies with them. Obviously this is completely optional, don't do this unless you really hate yourself, I have a problem. On the subject of trophies, I'd be remiss not to point out some obscure requirements in this list, such as the trophy for triggering all coin miracles, which mostly does just come down to the RNG of getting all the effects possible with each miracle icon type. No rhyme or reason to it, but there are 2 super secret ones. If you use a coin miracle upon dying, you'll get the special revive miracle. Take a shot in the dark at what that one does. And the other one is called Weaken, a miracle you can only trigger during the dialogue cutscene with the boss of chapter 6 right before fighting him. I didn't even know you could do that. And it doesn't even get its own icon, it's simply a normal red type icon. But nonetheless, you should get the Weaken miracle from it. A minor annoyance worth pointing out is that the trophies for defeating 25 of these types of large enemies only work with the normal base types. There are variants for all of these, and it would be easy to assume defeating any of them would count, but it appears that that is not the case. I found that out the hard way. In any case, Penny Punching Princess has a lot of issues, many of which were just impossible to ignore early on. I would love to see them take another shot at this,
just with much better implementation.
Oh well, there's always the official browser game. Now this is an underrated gem.